Black Creek Hollow. The name itself feels like a splinter under the skin. Compared to the other towns scattered across the county, ours was the smallest, the most forgotten. If you were to round up every soul from the babes in their cribs to the old-timers rattling in their chairs, you'd barely count 300 people. Yet, for a place so small, the Hollow had a reputation that stretched for miles. Not for its piety or its charm, but for its darkness. This town was a breeding ground for ill-tempered youths, and the kind of men who'd steal the fillings from your teeth while you slept. It was the cradle of chicken thieves and dog snatchers, a place infamous for its endless bitter arguments that poisoned the air day and night. You've heard the saying, good fences make good neighbors. In Black Creek Hollow, there were no good fences, only walls of spite. People didn't just tend to their own light, they'd sneak over in the dead of night to blow out their neighbor's lamp just so their own miserable flicker could seem brighter. Every other town in the county had long since been awarded a plaque for being a community of culture. Black Creek Hollow, we'd be lucky to get a commendation for avoiding a civil war. We didn't want a plaque. We were the kind of place that would have probably used it for a doorstop or a weapon.
A day in the Hollow, no matter how beautiful the sun shone, always began with the sound of rage. "Damn you to hell," a voice would shatter the morning peace. "Whichever one of you godless bastards snuck into my yard last night and stole my prize hen, may you choke on its bones. May your teeth turn black and your tongue swell up like a rotten gourd. May every generation of your family, from this day until the end of time, know nothing but misery."
That was Martha, one of the premier masters of the curse in Black Creek Hollow. It was never clear if the thief who stole her chicken was desperate or just plain stupid. But stealing from Martha was like stealing a bone from a rabid dog. You might get the bone, but you wouldn't get away unscathed. She'd dig up 10 generations of your ancestors and curse them all over again, her voice a shrill trumpet of fury that echoed through the valley until noon. She'd only stop when her throat was raw and her voice was a dry, croaking whisper, before finally stomping back inside her house.
Once Martha's daily sermon of hate concluded, the Millers would begin their performance. Mr. Miller was born with a short fuse, and he had the misfortune of marrying a woman whose tongue was sharper than a razor. It was a rare day they didn't chase each other out into the street for the whole town to watch. She'd be out front, brandishing a skillet, and he'd be right behind, swinging a broken broom handle. "You get back here, woman!" he'd roar, his face purple with rage. "I swear, if I don't teach you a lesson today, I'm not a man." She'd just cackle, looking over her shoulder as she ran. "You? A man? The last time you acted like a man was when you were born. I must have been blind to marry a useless layabout like you." The strangest part was that nobody ever intervened. Passers-by would just stop and watch, some even shouting encouragement. "Come on, Miller! Put your back into it! Can't even catch one woman?" That would only fuel his fury, but the man was built like a scarecrow and fueled by cheap whiskey and chewing tobacco. He never stood a chance against his wife, who had years of practice at running. The morning symphony of discord would usually be rounded out by the sounds of a fist fight. Samuel Nash and Mickey Evans. Those two had a feud that seemed to be passed down through their bloodlines. The moment they crossed paths, insults would fly, escalating until they were rolling in the dirt, trading clumsy punches. They'd been hauled down to the sheriff's office more times than anyone could count, but it never stuck. "You walking funny, Sam?" Mickey would sneer. "Or were you born that crooked?" Sam, clutching a half-empty bottle, would jab it toward him. "Who you calling crooked, you nine-fingered freak? This is a public road. I'll walk how I damn well please." A few moments later,
they'd be at it again. A whirlwind of flailing limbs, usually ending with both of them tumbling into the green, slimy pond behind Old Man Hemlock's property. And Hemlock, instead of helping him, would just stand on his porch, laughing and composing little poems. The sun shines bright, the wind is cool, another pair of village fools. And that was a peaceful morning in Black Creek Hollow. A brief, quiet pause before the next storm, which was always just over the horizon, and always promised to be worse than the last.
At the edge of town, beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak tree, sat a shack that served as the Hollow's dark heart. Big Bertha's Tea and Sundries. This place was the local hub for every lowlife and ne'er-do-well in the county. The sign said tea, but Bertha hadn't served a cup in years. The shop was a front, a place where she bought and sold stolen goods, no questions asked.
Everyone knew it, but no one particularly liked Bertha. Still, in the eyes of the Hollow's criminal element, she was a saint, a reliable pillar of their rotten community.
"Bertha, 2 more beers and a bag of jerky over here."
The voice belonged to Leo, a man whose name was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Since he was a boy, he'd borrowed anything that wasn't nailed down, never bothering to ask.
Sitting next to him was his partner, Cody. As a kid, he'd been a burden to his parents, driving them to ruin. Now, as a man, he'd expanded his operations to being a burden on the entire neighborhood. At their feet sat a burlap sack, tied tightly with a rope, caked in mud and chicken droppings. Every so often, the sack would twitch, and a muffled squawk would escape from within.
Bertha lumbered over with 2 bottles of beer, her eyes flicking down to the sack. She gave it a light kick with her worn-out boot. "You tie it up like that, it's gonna suffocate you, idiot," she grunted. "Next time, poke a hole in it so it can breathe." Leo popped the cap off his beer and gave her a contemptuous look. "You trying to teach me my business, Bertha? Poke a hole in it? Might as well put up a sign that says, 'Stolen chickens right here.' Everyone in this damn town would see it." Bertha chuckled, a low rumbling sound. "You think anyone in Black Creek Hollow doesn't already know you 2 are thieves? I don't even need to ask. Those are Martha's hens from last night, aren't they?" "Watch your mouth, old woman," Cody snapped, his voice tight. "You want to keep doing business with us or not?" All right, just making conversation. What are you so jumpy for?" she said, her tone shifting to business. "How many you got in there? Let's get this done."
4, Leo said. "All roosters, none of them under 7 pounds. We've been doing this a long time, Bertha. You know you've never gotten a bad deal from us." "Not a bad deal from me, maybe," she wheezed, her fat folding over her belt. "I buy 'em for 1/3 of what they're worth on the market. That's why I'm getting bigger, and you 2 still look like a couple of starved scarecrows." She sighed dramatically. "All right, fine. Tell you what, since it's a special day, this round's on the house. As for the birds, same old price, $20 a head. 4 birds, that's $80. Here." She peeled 4 $20 bills from a thick wad and slapped them on the table. Cody snatched the money while she dragged the squawking sack behind her counter out of sight.
Chewing on a piece of jerky, Leo looked over at Cody. "So, what's the plan for tonight? You got a target yet?" "Mrs. Pike's place," Cody said without hesitation. "The old lady down by the chapel." Leo groaned. "Her? Seriously? We tried that place last month, remember? We came back with nothing but mud and dug crap on our boots. You forgotten already?" "You're not keeping up with the news," Cody said, leaning in. "I heard her brother from down south came to visit a few days ago. First time in 10 years. Think about it. He wouldn't show up empty-handed, would he? I heard he struck it rich down there. Probably left his sister with a nice little nest egg."
Leo's eyes, which were usually dull and listless, suddenly lit up like a car's headlights. Is that right? Well now, that changes things. An old woman, all by herself, practically helpless. That's like taking candy from a baby. That's what I'm saying, Cody whispered, his voice filled with a greedy excitement. I've been watching her place for 2 weeks. If we don't hit it soon, I guarantee you Scarface Logan and his crew will beat us to it. We can't let that happen. Leo slapped his thigh. All right then, it's settled. Same place as always, 10 o'clock. Tonight, we move.
The woman they were talking about was Mrs. Eleanor Pike. To call her life tragic would be an understatement. She was nearly 90 years old, with no children and no family to speak of, save for the brother who had drifted away to some far-off state. His visit last month was the first in a decade, and Eleanor knew, deep down, that he was only there to see how close she was to the grave. He wanted the land her house stood on. She knew her brother's heart, or the lack of one, but she held her tongue, swallowing the bitter pill of her lonely, cursed fate.
Her house was a reflection of her life, a dilapidated, single-story clapboard home slowly surrendering to the relentless grip of nature. The yard was a jungle of weeds that grew waist-high, choking out the dry, withered banana trees. The small porch was sinking, its wood splintered and cracked.
Inside, there was nothing of value. The most prominent feature was a small wooden altar, its paint peeled and faded to a pathetic, grimy color. A set of wooden chairs with broken legs sat in the corner, waiting for a repair that would never come. Mrs. Pike spent her days in solitude, her world confined to the 4 crumbling walls of her home. She survived on a meager pension for the elderly.
The worst times were when she fell ill. With no one to care for her, the house would fill with the cloying, sickly sweet smell of decay, a mixture of her own failing body and the small creatures that would crawl into the walls to die, their bodies impossible for her to find and remove. Leo and Cody were right about one thing. Her brother had given her some money. But it was nowhere near the fortune they imagined. It was a pittance, a gesture meant to soothe his own conscience before he sold her final resting place out from under her. The day bled into evening, and darkness began to crawl over Black Creek Hollow. The meeting spot was an abandoned, roofless chapel at a crossroads, its stones covered in moss. Leo was already there, pacing impatiently, the cherry of his cigarette glowing in the gloom. Just as his cigarette burned down to the filter, Cody emerged from the shadows, looking disheveled. "What the hell took you so long?" Leo hissed. "It's 10 o'clock. The mosquitoes are eating me alive out of here." Damn Community Watch Patrol. I was just about to leave when they came strolling down my street. Had to wait for them to pass. We've gotta be careful. If they spot us, it's all over. All right, let's move. They pulled black ski masks over their faces, transforming their already unpleasant features into monstrous, anonymous shapes. They moved like ghosts through the overgrown fields, heading straight for Mrs. Pike's house. At this time of night in the hollow, most homes were dark and silent. Mrs. Pike's house was different. It didn't have electricity. The only light came from a single, flickering kerosene lamp burning on the altar, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. "You think she's asleep?" Cody whispered. "Don't know. Don't see her," Leo replied, his eyes scanning the dim interior through a grimy window. "Probably. Let's do this." Leo pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket. It contained his tools of the trade, a set of master keys that could defeat any lock. But for a house like this, he didn't need them. He selected a single, bent piece of metal, like a dentist's pick. He slid it into the keyhole, jiggled it a few times, and with a soft click, the old latch inside gave way. The wooden door groaned open, its creak echoing unnaturally loud in the dead silence of the night. "Go," Leo gestured with his head, and Cody slipped inside. The moment they stepped over the threshold, a wave of unnatural cold washed over them. It wasn't the damp chill of a neglected house. It was a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to sink right into their bones. "Jesus," Cody breathed, his breath misting in the air. "It's as cold as a tomb in here."
They scanned the main room. It was just as sparse as they'd expected. Their eyes, working in unison, were drawn to the bedroom. A faded, floral-patterned curtain, yellowed with age, hung in the doorway, obscuring the view. This was the moment of truth, the point where their hearts began to pound a little faster in their chests. As they drew closer, Leo felt a strange sense of unease, a creeping dread that he couldn't explain. He'd robbed dozens of houses, many of them far more secure than this one. But something about this place made the hair on his arms stand up. It was a primal fear, a feeling that he was an intruder in a place he should never have entered.
"What's wrong with you?" Cody hissed, nudging him forward. "Get a move on." Leo shook his head, trying to clear the fog of fear. I know. He took a deep, steadying breath and slowly, carefully pushed the filthy curtain aside. A thick, putrid smell assaulted his nostrils, a wave of sour decay that made him gag. God, what is that smell? It's like something died in here. It was the smell of the house, the smell Mrs. Pike had grown so accustomed to, a combination of old age, sickness, and death. But for Leo and Cody, it was almost unbearable. "Hurry up, man," Cody urged, covering his nose and mouth with his sleeve. "I'm going to be sick."
Gritting his teeth, Leo stepped into the bedroom. The air inside was even more oppressive, thick with the stench of mold and something else, something foul and cloying. It was darker and colder in here. Their eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, and they could make out the shape of a bed, shrouded by a thin mosquito net that had turned the color of dingy cheesecloth. Besides the bed, there was a single wooden wardrobe and a small metal trunk at the foot of the bed. Their professional instincts took over. Force eyes immediately locked onto the trunk. That had to be it. That's where she'd keep the money. The trunk was old, streaked with rust, and secured with a small, flimsy-looking padlock. It wouldn't stop a child, let alone them. Leo knelt, pulled out his pick, and with a few deft twists, the lock sprang open. They held their breath, anticipating the sight of cash and valuables. But inside, there was no money, no jewelry, nothing but a few sets of old, neatly folded clothes and 2 clay dolls. They were crudely made, one depicting a man, the other a young girl, their hands clasped together. Their original colors were long gone, faded to a dull, uniform gray. Thinking there must be something hidden, Leo brushed the dolls aside and frantically searched through the clothes, patting and turning over every piece. Nothing. "What the hell?" he muttered in disbelief. "Why would she lock this junk up?" He looked closer at the clothes. They weren't women's clothes. They were men's clothes, but they were ancient, tattered, and worn. Mrs. Pike had no husband, no son. The clay dolls were worthless. Dismissing the trunk, they turned their attention to the wardrobe at the end of the bed. They tore through it, pulling out its meager contents, but again they found nothing of value. Frustration began to set in. By now, in any other house, they would have found something, even if it was just a few dollars. There was only one place left to look, the one place they had been trying to avoid, on Mrs. Pike's person. They knew how old people were, how they clung to their money as if it were a part of their own body, often sleeping with it tucked into their clothes. They had hoped to avoid this. Robbing an empty house was one thing. Robbing a person, even a sleeping one, felt different, riskier. But now they had no other choice.
Leo took a deep breath, the foul air filling his lungs, and slowly, cautiously, reached out to lift the mosquito net.
A sliver of light from the kerosene lamp in the other room cut through the darkness, illuminating the scene within. And what they saw made their blood run cold. Inside the net, Mrs. Pike wasn't lying down. She was sitting up, cross-legged, perfectly still. In her lap, she cradled a large black cat, its eyes glowing like malevolent emeralds in the dark, staring directly at them.
And then her ancient wrinkled face contorted, pulling back into a grotesque, triumphant grin, revealing gums that were mostly bare, except for a few blackened, crooked teeth. A strangled gasp escaped their throats. They stumbled backward, falling over each other in a heap of pure terror. "Oh God, a ghost!" Cody shrieked, his voice cracking. "Ghost, help us!"
At that exact moment, as if responding to their terror, the flame of the kerosene lamp in the other room sputtered and died, plunging the entire house into absolute, suffocating darkness. The only thing they could see were the two burning green eyes of the cat. A moment later, they heard a rustling sound from the bed. Mrs. Pike was getting up. The cat on her lap let out a low, guttural hiss, a sound of pure rage. Scrambling on the floor, the two men, who had been so bold and arrogant just moments before, were now reduced to pathetic, whimpering animals. They crawled frantically toward the front door, their hearts pounding in their chests. They reached it, fumbled with the handle, and pulled. It wouldn't budge. It was as if it had been sealed with concrete. A demonic force held it shut. A sliver of pale moonlight pierced through a grimy window, casting a ghastly, half-lit glow on Mrs. Pike's face as she emerged from the bedroom. Her eyes were wide, white, and utterly soulless. "You dared to enter my house," a voice rasped, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It seemed to come from a great distance. "Now, you will die here." The specter of death was upon them, and the bond of their criminal brotherhood dissolved in an instant.
"Please, ma'am, spare me," Cody sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. "It was him. It was all his idea. He dragged me into this." Leo, though paralyzed with fear, felt a surge of fury at the betrayal. He spun around and slapped Cody hard across the face. "You coward! You were the one who suggested this place!" He then turned back to the horrifying figure, his voice a desperate plea. "Please, ma'am, he's the mastermind. I was just following his lead. I swear I'll never come back here. I'll burn offerings for you. I'll do anything. Just please, don't kill me." "Both of you," the raspy voice echoed in the crushing darkness. "Your time is up."
The last thing the Hollow heard that night was two sharp, piercing screams of agony, followed by the frantic, echoing barks of nearby dogs. And then, just as quickly, silence fell once more. Inside the dark, cold bedroom, the mosquito net swayed gently, though there was no wind. The kerosene lamp, untouched, spontaneously reignited, its weak flame doing little to push back the oppressive, chilling atmosphere of the room. The next morning, the sun rose on Black Creek Hollow, and the usual symphony of chaos began anew. Martha was cursing a new thief, the Millers were having their daily chase, but at Big Bertha's shack, two faces were conspicuously absent. Bertha kept glancing down the road, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Where are those two idiots?" she grumbled to herself. "Probably blew that $80 already and are looking for another score."
She wondered if they'd found a new fence, a more generous one. The thought soured her mood. Her meager profits from the sundries were nothing. She lived off the desperate dealings of men like Leo and Cody. If they were gone, her business would soon follow. One day passed, then two. The village didn't notice their absence. It was normal for men like them to vanish for a week or two after a big score, holding up in some cheap motel in the next county, spending their ill-gotten gains on booze and gambling. The cycle of petty crime in the Hollow continued unabated. There were plenty of other thieves to take their place. Down at Mr. Sterling's farm, it was late, but he couldn't sleep. A week ago, after a bit too much homemade corn liquor, he'd woken up to find half his chicken coop empty. His dog, an old hound named Buster, had raised the alarm just in time to save the rest. Since then, Mr. Sterling had been on high alert, sitting on his porch every night, his old hunting rifle across his lap, taking swigs from a flask and listening to the sounds of the night. Suddenly, Buster started barking from the backyard, a low, guttural sound that wasn't his usual stranger bark. This was something different. Mr. Sterling grabbed his rifle and a heavy flashlight and stomped toward the back. He found Buster chained to a tree, his hackles raised, his teeth bared, growling at the chicken coop. Mr. Sterling's blood ran hot. "All right, you sons of bitches," he muttered, gripping his rifle tighter. "Tonight, you pay." He crept toward the coop, planning to burst in and catch them red-handed. He threw the door open, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, ready to confront a pair of local thugs. But what he saw inside froze him in his tracks, replacing his rage with a primal, paralyzing fear. It wasn't a thief. It was an old woman, dressed in filthy, tattered rags. She was holding one of his hens, and she had its neck in her mouth, tearing at it like a wild animal. Blood dripped from her chin, staining her clothes. When the light hit her, she looked up. Her face was a grotesque mask of horror. Her skin was a bruised, purplish color. Her eyes were wide, white, and completely devoid of pupils. Her face was a death mask. The rifle slipped from Mr. Sterling's numb fingers and clattered to the ground. A warm wetness spread through his pants. "Ghost," he stammered. "Oh God, it's a ghost!" With a scream that tore from the very depths of his soul, he turned and ran, not stopping until he had bolted the door of his house behind him. His wife, woken by the scream, rushed downstairs. "What is it? What happened?" "A ghost," he gasped, his body trembling uncontrollably. "I saw a ghost in the chicken coop, an old woman eating one of the hens raw." "Are you sure? You weren't drinking again, were you?" "I saw it with my own eyes. We have to lock everything, now!" They barred the doors and windows, huddling together in the living room, listening to Buster's frantic barking, which eventually subsided into whimpers, and then an unnerving silence. They didn't dare venture outside until the first rays of dawn painted the sky. When they finally crept down to the coop, they found a scene of absolute carnage. Not a single chicken was left alive. They were all lying on the floor, their bodies strangely desiccated and shriveled, their skin a dry, purplish husk. There wasn't a single drop of blood to be found anywhere. Mrs. Sterling, who had hoped her husband was just drunk and confused, now saw the truth with her own eyes. It wasn't a thief. A monster had visited their farm last night. "You have to tell Sheriff Brody," she said, her voice shaking. This is something evil, if it comes back." "You're right," Mr. Sterling said, his face pale. "I'll go now." A short while later, Mr. Sterling was at the sheriff's office, pulling Sheriff Brody aside. "Sheriff, I need to talk to you in private." "What's the matter, Sterling? You look like you've seen a ghost." "That's just it, Sheriff. I have." He recounted the night's horrific events. Sheriff Brody, a practical man who had seen his share of strange things in the Hollow, was skeptical. "A ghost that eats chickens? Are you sure it wasn't a stray dog or a fox?" "Sheriff, I swear on my mother's grave, I know what I saw. If you don't believe me, come to my farm.
The evidence is still there.
The sheriff, intrigued by the conviction in Sterling's voice, agreed. He brought along Mr. Alistair Finch, a quiet, scholarly man who had retired to the Hollow years ago. Finch was known for his vast library of old, strange books and his knowledge of local folklore and forgotten histories. When they arrived at the Sterling farm and saw the chicken carcasses, both men were stunned into silence. The bodies were completely desiccated, as if every drop of moisture had been sucked out of them. This was no animal attack. Finch knelt, examining one of the birds, his face grim. "This is dark work," he murmured. "Extremely dark." Sheriff Brody turned to the Sterlings. "For now, keep this to yourselves. We don't want to cause a panic. Finch and I will look into this." Later, back in Finch's study, surrounded by towering shelves of leather-bound books, the sheriff finally asked, "What do you make of it, Alistair? What could do something like that?"
Finch's face was grave. He stared out the window, his fingers steepled. "A few nights ago, I observed a profound disturbance in the heavens. The stars were scattered, out of alignment. Yin and yang were in chaos. The malevolent energy, it was overwhelming the benevolent. It happened on a day the old almanacs call a yang polarity nexus, an exceptionally unlucky day, a doorway for great evil." "So you think what Sterling saw was real? A ghost?" Finch sighed heavily. "I have studied these things for decades, Sheriff. The supernatural is no stranger to me. Combining what you've told me with the celestial omens, I fear the possibility is very high. To be certain, I must cast the I Ching." He led the sheriff into a back room, a small, quiet chamber that served as his private sanctum. He sat before a low table, took 3 ancient-looking coins, and shook them in his cupped hands while murmuring an ancient incantation. He cast the coins. When they settled, his face grew pale. All 3 coins landed tails up, the darkest possible omen. He cast them again. The result was the same. A sheen of sweat broke out on his brow. The air in the room grew heavy, tense. On the 3rd and final cast, the coins clattered onto the table and, impossibly, landed stacked one on top of the other, perfectly balanced. The top coin was tails up. "My God," Sheriff Brody whispered. "What does it mean?" Finch looked up, his eyes filled with a terror the sheriff had never seen before. "It's worse than I thought," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The omens are absolute. There isn't one. There are 3 of them." The news spread through Black Creek Hollow like wildfire, carried on the back of hushed whispers and fearful glances. A ghost, or perhaps 3, was haunting their town. Some scoffed, dismissing it as superstitious nonsense. The criminal element of the Hollow was even less convinced. A belief in ghosts and divine retribution wasn't compatible with their line of work. Among the most skeptical were Scarface Logan and Tony the Eel, another pair of lifelong partners in crime. "You hear the news?" Logan said, taking a long drag from his cigarette at a grimy tavern. "They're saying the Hollow's haunted now." Tony laughed. "I heard. 3 of them, apparently. All the better for us. The more these idiots are scared of the dark, the easier it is for us to work in it." That night, Black Creek Hollow was shrouded in an oppressive, suffocating silence. The moon was a bloody smear behind a thick blanket of black clouds. In this deep, starless gloom, 2 shadows detached themselves from the darkness. It was Logan, with Tony right beside him. In a cruel twist of fate, the house they had chosen for their night's work was none other than Mrs. Eleanor Pike's.
They crept toward the house, the silence amplifying the sound of their own breathing. The closer they got, the more the unnatural cold seemed to seep from the house's very walls. "This place gives me the creeps, man," Tony whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "What's the matter? You're not actually scared of those ghost stories, are you?" Logan sneered. "Shut up! It's an old lady's house. What's the worst that could happen?" They reached the front door and were about to start working on the lock when a sudden, frigid gust of wind blasted them. It was followed by the piercing, blood-curdling screech of a cat. They spun around. Perched on the rickety fence post was a huge black cat. It stared at them, its eyes glowing with an intelligent, malevolent light. This cat was different. It didn't flinch. It didn't move. It just stared, its posture radiating pure, unadulterated hatred. "Get out of here, you stupid animal!" Logan hissed, kicking a loose stone in its direction. The cat didn't even blink. "Logan, let's just go," Tony whispered. "I've got a bad feeling about this." "Will you shut your mouth?" Logan snapped. He strode forward, pulling his leg back to deliver a powerful kick. In a blur of motion too fast to follow, the cat leaped into the air. Its claws, sharp as razors, raked across his shin, tearing through his jeans and deep into his flesh. Logan screamed in pain and shock. "You little bastard!" he roared. "I'll kill you!" Forgetting entirely about the robbery, he lunged at the cat. What followed was a bizarre one-sided battle. The cat was a phantom, a blur of black fur and green light. It dodged his every clumsy attack, leaving a dozen new, bleeding cuts all over his arms and face. "Tony, what the hell are you doing?" he screamed. "Help me kill this thing!" But Tony was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. After another minute, Logan remembered the knife in his pocket. He pulled out a switchblade. The sight of the steel seemed to finally register with the cat. It took a few steps back, hissed one last time, and then leapt with impossible agility through a broken pane in the window, disappearing into the darkness of the house. Logan stood there, bleeding and breathing heavily. Inside the dark house, the cat landed silently on the floor and padded directly to the bedroom. The air in there was thick with the smell of death. It leaped onto the bed. Lying there, side by side, were 3 corpses. One was Mrs. Pike. The other 2 were Leo and Cody. All 3 were in a state of decay. The cat walked across their bodies, and as it did, a jolt like an invisible string being pulled shot through them.
All 3 corpses sat bolt upright. The cat turned its glowing eyes toward the front door and let out a low, guttural growl, like a command. The 3 corpses swiveled their heads in unison and began to move, shambling toward the door.
Outside, Logan and Tony were trying to force the door. Suddenly, Tony, who was peering through a crack, let out a terrified scream. Staring back at him from the darkness were 3 pairs of wide, white, soulless eyes. "Ghosts!" he shrieked, shoving Logan out of the way and running for his life, not even looking back. Logan, thrown to the ground, looked up just as the door creaked open. Framed in the doorway were 3 figures. The first was Mrs. Pike, her face a shrunken, desiccated mask. The other 2 were Leo and Cody. What are you doing here?" Logan stammered. There was no answer, only a low, gurgling moan. The black cat, perched on Mrs. Pike's shoulder, hissed, and the 3 figures began to shuffle forward. "Tony!" he screamed, a desperate final plea. "Help me!" His cry was cut short, replaced by a wet, tearing sound that was swallowed by the night.
Tony ran as if the devil himself were at his heels. He crashed headlong into a figure walking down the road, sending both of them sprawling. "Ghost! There's a ghost! Help me!" he sobbed. When his vision cleared, he saw he had run into Sheriff Brody and Mr. Finch. "Calm down, son," the sheriff said. "What's going on?" "It's Logan, Mrs. Pike's house. There are ghosts! They got him," he stammered. "Leo and Cody? They were there too! They're dead! They're walking dead!"
Sheriff Brody and Finch exchanged a grim look. As they raced toward the house, Finch stopped abruptly. The air was thick with a black, swirling miasma of malevolent energy. "This is it," he said. "This is the source." He turned to Tony. "Tell me everything." Tony recounted the entire story. As he spoke, Finch's expression grew darker. "It's not just a ghost," he murmured. "It's a grave cat." "A what?" the sheriff asked. "It's a creature from the oldest, darkest folklore," Finch explained. "Most lore says a cat has 9 lives, but there are rare, corrupted variants. A cat born with only 8 souls. This void leaves it open to demonic influence. It becomes a grave cat. It is said that if it jumps over a fresh corpse, it doesn't recall the person's soul. It invites a demon to inhabit the body, turning it into a soulless ghoul that feeds on the life force of the living."
"So what do we do?" the sheriff asked. "No," Finch said firmly. "To go in now would be suicide. We must retreat. I need to prepare." "What about Logan?" Tony asked. Finch shook his head sadly. "There is no hope for him, son. By now he is one of them." For the rest of the night, Finch was a whirlwind of activity. He unlocked a hidden compartment and removed a heavy, ancient book. He spent hours poring over its brittle pages. Finally, he found what he was looking for, a chapter titled The Grave Cat's Possession. The book described one possible, though incredibly dangerous method. It was called The Ritual of Soul-Swapping Embodiment. He would call back the true souls of the 4 victims and place them inside temporary vessels to fight the ghouls. The next morning, Sheriff Brody and Tony were dispatched to the county seat with a strange shopping list. They returned hours later, their car loaded with bizarre items. 4 large paper effigies, 3 male, 1 female, and a smaller, intricately made effigy of a black cat. That evening, they gathered in Finch's sanctum. The air was thick with the smell of incense. The 4 human effigies stood in a line, their blank, paper faces unsettlingly lifelike. In front of them sat the paper cat. "Are you sure about this, Alistair?" the sheriff asked. "What are the odds?" "If everything goes according to plan," Finch replied, "I am perhaps 80% certain of success. This is not an exact science, Sheriff." He sat before the effigies, began to chant, and struck a small brass gong. As the vibrations filled the room, a chilling wind whipped through the closed windows. He picked up a small flag and pointed it at the paper cat. "By the laws of yin and yang, I summon you to serve," he commanded. Then, the impossible happened. The paper cat began to move. Its head twitched, and its painted green eyes began to glow with an otherworldly light. Tony let out a yelp of terror. Finch then pointed his flag at the female effigy, the one representing Mrs. Pike. The paper cat turned its glowing head toward it and let out 3 low, papery meows. In response, a tall, shadowy figure materialized in the doorway, stooping to enter the room. It had the unmistakable shape of Eleanor Pike. The shadow drifted across the room and merged with the paper effigy, which shuddered once and then stood still. Its eyes, previously just painted black dots, opened, looking around the room with an unnerving awareness. One by one, Finch repeated the ritual for the other 3 effigies. Each time, a shadowy form corresponding to Leo, Cody, and Logan would appear and enter its paper vessel. Soon, all 4 effigies were alive, standing silently. "By my authority, you will march," Finch commanded. "Go east and reclaim what is yours." And the 4 paper figures began to walk. Their movements were stiff and jerky, but they moved with purpose, marching out of the house and down the dark road toward Mrs. Pike's home. When the strange procession arrived at the house, the real grave cat was waiting, perched on the porch railing, hissing. Behind it, the 4 ghouls emerged, their bodies now visibly more decayed. The 2 groups, one of paper and soul, the other of flesh and demon, faced each other in the dead yard. "Reclaim your flesh!" Finch yelled, and the 4 effigies charged.
The battle that followed was a thing of nightmares. The paper effigy of Mrs. Pike engaged her own corrupted corpse. The other 3 did the same. The yard became a whirlwind of tearing paper, rotting flesh, and unholy screams. The ghouls were stronger, but the effigies were relentless, animated by the pure will of their stolen souls. Paper limbs were torn off, chunks of putrid flesh were ripped away, but the fight raged on.
Then, just as the battle reached its frenzied peak, the sky exploded. Clouds boiled in from nowhere, and lightning tore through the sky. "It's a heavenly punishment!" Finch screamed, his face turning ashen. "The natural order is correcting itself! Get back!" A colossal bolt of pure white lightning struck the center of the yard with the force of a bomb. The world turned white, and the sound was deafening.
When their vision returned, the yard was a blackened, smoking crater. The ghouls and the effigies were gone, vaporized into ash. The grave cat let out one final agonizing shriek as the lightning consumed it. The force of the backlash threw Finch violently to the ground, and he lay still, a trickle of black blood running from his mouth. Finch lay in a coma for 2 weeks. When he finally awoke, his first words were a weak whisper to Sheriff Brody, who had kept a constant vigil at his bedside. "The cat. Is it gone?" "It's gone, Alastair," the sheriff said, relief flooding his voice. "The house, the bodies, everything was cleansed by the lightning. It's over." A faint smile touched Finch's lips. "Good," he whispered. "The Hollow is safe." The events of that night changed Black Creek Hollow forever. Tony, granted a pardon for his role in stopping the evil, gave up his life of crime. The other thieves, hearing the terrifying story, became convinced that a powerful supernatural justice was watching over the town. A few years later, Black Creek Hollow, against all odds, was officially awarded the title of Cultural Community. They held a celebration that lasted for 3 days. But in the now silent, empty house of Eleanor Pike, a final, quiet tragedy played out. Amidst the dust and decay of the bedroom, 2 small clay dolls, one of a man and one of a young girl, which had been cast aside in the chaos, slowly shifted. An unseen force moved them across the floor until they were side by side. The man's tiny clay hand moved and took the girl's, and in the deep, permeating silence of the house, a faint, sorrowful lullaby could be heard, a ghostly whisper on the wind. "Hush now, little darling, don't you cry, Mama's gone and Daddy's in the sky. In this lonely house, a life so cold, a story of sorrow never to be told."